I found out I was dead weight at a charity gala. Not in a whispered argument behind closed doors. Not during a fight, or with a text. Or even a cowardly note. No, I found out standing under a cascade of white gold chandeliers, while a jazz trio played something soft and expensive in the background. And the women around me clinked glasses and smiled too wide. My husband, ex-husband by the time this story ends, stood in a tight cluster of investment partners. His hand lazily draped around the waist of a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger, blonder, and wore a slit dress so high it looked like defiance. Or maybe that was just me. I had to let go of some dead weight, he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Swirling his scotch like it made him important. 20 years of marriage and nothing to show for it. She wasn't a partner. She was a placeholder. Laughter. 3 men and 1 woman. Sharp suits. Sharper lies. And me, standing just behind them, having arrived earlier than expected. His words didn't slice. They didn't shatter me. They confirmed what I already knew. I smiled. Calm. Cold. Complete. Because I had known for exactly 73 days that he was sleeping with someone from the office. I'd known for 52 days that he'd funneled joint funds into a separate shell account. And I had known for 28 days that he was preparing to blindside me with divorce papers so he could walk away clean, free, and fresh with his new toy in tow. But tonight? Tonight was for appearances. And appearances were my domain. Let him underestimate me, I thought, sipping my champagne slowly. The settlement will weigh heavier than he ever imagined. He turned mid-laugh and caught sight of me. He froze. Because I wasn't supposed to be here until later. He thought I'd be tucked away at the other side of the ballroom, schmoozing donors like the good little silent wife I had once been. Darling, I said softly. Stepping forward. You forgot to introduce me. The woman at his side blinked. His colleagues fell into an awkward hush. And he, red at the ears now, stammered. Adele, I didn't see you. Oh, you did, I replied gently. You just didn't expect me to hear the truth, did you? I turned, not waiting for his answer. I had a phone recording in my clutch. A perfect audio clip of his admission. And that was just the beginning. Shape, there's something about betrayal that either breaks you or builds you. I chose the latter. But make no mistake, I didn't walk away that night sad or shaking. I walked away ready. And with every step across that polished marble floor. I wasn't a woman who had just been humiliated, I was a woman walking her enemy straight into a trap. Shape, he filed for divorce the following week. Just as I expected. What he didn't expect was that my lawyer already had copies of our joint asset transfers, a full portfolio of his secret investment account. And several discrete screenshots of messages that should never have been sent on a work server. He also didn't expect me to have frozen the family trust before he could liquidate it. Or that I'd already had my prenup reviewed and voided thanks to a clause he'd violated the moment he stepped out of our marriage bed. Emotionally satisfying revenge, people say, is a myth. I disagree. Revenge, when done right, is quiet. Legal. Inevitable. And it begins long before anyone sees it coming. Shape, the day he called me dead weight was not the day he betrayed me. It was the day I stopped pretending he hadn't. And that's the day he lost everything. He just didn't know it yet. 73 days before the gala, I found the receipt. Not in some dramatic fashion, no lipstick on a collar, no hotel key in a blazer. Just a digital receipt, emailed to our shared inbox by mistake. A $4,200 dinner at an exclusive tasting room in Sonoma. 4-2. I was in my study when I saw it. Nursing a cup of rooibos tea and reviewing documents for the Women's Shelter Board. The subject line read, "Your Lux reservation confirmation." He told me he had a strategy retreat that weekend. I opened the receipt. Looked at the wine pairings. The private suite. The notation at the bottom, Mr. L. Monroe and guest. I remember the stillness. The clarity. No panic. No racing heart. Just this icy click in the center of my chest. Like a lock turning. Shape, I didn't confront him. Not then. That was the old me of Adele Monroe, the political wife, the fundraiser host, the perfectly dressed shadow in his spotlight. The woman who once excused late nights and working dinners. Not anymore. Instead, I opened a new folder on my desktop and titled it Insurance. I began collecting evidence, accounts, timelines. I pulled phone records. Located his shell company using tax ID traces from our accountant's emails. I made 3 quiet visits to our private bank. Froze the trust. Secured a forensic accountant. I didn't just plan revenge. I documented it. Shape 52 days before the gala. I met with Lorraine Hughes, divorce attorney to the ruthless. She wore red lacquer nails and spoke with the calm tone of a surgeon. He's been diverting funds, I said, sliding the documents across her desk. I have screenshots and financials. He's also sleeping with a paralegal at his firm. She arched one eyebrow. And you haven't said anything? Why would I? I said. I want him confident. Loud. Arrogant. When men think they're winning, they get careless. She smiled slowly. You're not here to file. You're here to corner him. I met her eyes. I want to watch him build his own gallows. Shape 28 days before the gala, he kissed my cheek after breakfast and said, "You've always been loyal. That's what I love about you." I watched him walk out the door with a tangle of guilt and cruelty in his voice. The way liars talk when they think kindness will buy silence. He didn't know I'd already discovered the NDA he made his mistress sign. Or that she was foolish enough to message him through her work laptop, messages now quietly in my possession. He didn't know I'd made copies of the prenup. That I'd found the clause stating infidelity nullified its protections. He didn't know I'd contacted the board of his firm anonymously. He had no idea the gun he was pointing at me had no bullets. Shape, I moved through those weeks like a woman possessed by grace. At events. I stood beside him with my practiced smile. At home, I made perfect dinners, poured his wine, let him think I was blind. But every night, I wrote emails. Sent packages. Planted seeds. Justice is patient. And so was I. Shape, the irony? He called me dead weight when I was the one holding him up for 20 years. When his father died, I wrote every condolence letter. When his firm went through layoffs, I hosted the partners' wives to keep the peace. When he had his panic attacks during the campaign scandal. It was my body that held him through the shakes. But none of that mattered. Not to men like him. He didn't want a woman. He wanted an audience. Shape, there's a moment, just before the fall, when the ground starts to tremble under a person's feet. They don't notice it yet. But the earthquake is coming. That's what the gala was. His last stable ground. He had no idea he was already standing on the fault line. Shape, the night before the gala. I stood in front of the mirror wearing the emerald gown he once bought for our 10th anniversary. A dress he hadn't complimented in years. He walked in. Tied his cufflinks, and said, "Try not to overdo it tonight. Let the real donors shine." I didn't answer. I just adjusted the diamond pin at my shoulder, a gift from my inheritance, and smiled at my reflection. Because tomorrow, I wasn't going to shine. I was going to blind him. I wasn't always this woman. Not poised. Not composed. Not calculating. Once. I was 22 and breathless, dizzy on rooftop kisses and promises whispered between law school exams and espresso shots. I believed love was a partnership. That sacrifice was sacred, and that when two people built a life together, they both carried weight. But I carried it alone. Even then, I should have seen it. The way he corrected me in front of friends, masked as jokes. The way his praise was always conditional, "You did great, Adele." For someone who doesn't work in finance. The way I shrank myself to make room for his ambition. He told me we were a team. But I was the one who put my dreams in a drawer so he could chase his. The first year of his startup. I covered the mortgage with the inheritance from my grandmother. When it failed, I consoled him, held him, told him failure was noble. He thanked me with dinners I cooked and promises to make it all worth it. When he landed the job at Meriton Law, he celebrated with his partners. He forgot I was the one who wrote the first pitch for his application on the back of a grocery receipt in the middle of our cramped kitchen. I told myself love meant forgiveness. Now I understand, love without respect is just slow erasure. Shape after the gala, people started looking at me differently. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't have to. Something shifted that night, the way I smiled too calmly, walked too quietly. Like a storm held in lace and lipstick. 3 days after the event, Veronica Alston, the wife of one of his senior partners, cornered me at a brunch. "You look luminous," she said carefully, eyes scanning mine. "Something's different." "Just finally breathing," I answered. Her gaze sharpened. "He doesn't deserve you." "He never did," I said. Then added. "But I deserved me." Shape, the thing about society circles is that everyone knows everything, they just wait for permission to talk. Whispers began to follow him. Why wasn't Adele at last Friday's dinner? Was that girl at the office really just a paralegal? Did you hear she's meeting with Lorraine Hughes? He tried to stay ahead of it. Scheduled interviews. Smiled wider. Bought me roses, unprompted. That's when I knew he was scared. Shape, one night. I found him in the kitchen with his phone held low, whispering. He stiffened when I walked in. "Work thing," he said. I nodded. "Of course." Paused. Then added. "You've always been good at juggling." He looked up sharply. I smiled and reached for the wine opener. "Don't worry. I'm not the jealous type. Anymore." Shape, our house became a stage. He performed. I studied. He didn't know I'd installed a private security system with discrete audio backups. That I had duplicates of every financial file. That the flash drive in my jewelry box held more than just spreadsheets, it held patterns. Proof. Precision. He underestimated me because I let him. He forgot I was raised by a woman who taught me how to write wills and read contracts by 16. He forgot I sat in courtrooms before I sat in pews. Shape, my therapist, Gloria, the only soul I told the full truth to, once asked me. Why not just leave? I smiled. Because walking away isn't enough. Then what is enough? When he realizes I was never the weak one. I was the storm he couldn't see. She leaned back, nodded slowly. Then I hope he brings an umbrella. Shape, the poetic irony of men like him is this, they think the power is in the money. But it's not. It's in who understands the rules. Who holds the receipts. Who waits. And I waited like a glacier. Silent. Cold. Inevitable. Shape, 14 days before he officially served the divorce papers, I made one final move. I met with Ms. Reyes, the head of his firm's ethics committee, and left an envelope on her desk. Inside, a timeline. Correspondence. Confirmation that he'd used firm resources to fund romantic getaways with an employee under his direct supervision. Not to destroy his career. I wasn't interested in petty revenge. But to shift the leverage. And leverage is everything in divorce. Shape, the day he handed me the papers, he tried to feign sympathy. I don't want this to get messy, he said, sighing like the martyr he imagined himself to be. Let's just be adults. I took the envelope gently. Opened it. Flipped through. Then looked him straight in the eye and said, "You're absolutely right. Let's keep it clean. You'll be receiving my countersuit by morning. He blinked. Counter, and please, don't make a scene at the firm. The ethics board can be so thorough. His face blanched. For the first time, the mask cracked. And I smiled. Because now he saw me. He didn't show up for the first court date. His lawyer came alone, slick-haired, smug, and 5 minutes late. He handed my attorney a glossy folder and said something about amicable division. Lorraine didn't even flinch. She slid our folder across the table. Labeled simply, Discovery. Inside, timelines. Deposits. Proof of asset shielding. NDA documentation. Ethics violations. A printed transcript of the gala recording. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't smirk. Lorraine simply said, your client can either negotiate. Or we can let the court decide how to treat perjury and marital fraud. The man paled. I'll speak with him. I'd recommend it, Lorraine said, closing her briefcase. He's already 3 moves behind. Shape 2 days later, he called me. Can we talk? His voice was tight. Controlled. Practiced. I let silence stretch like silk on the line before I said, we're already talking. Without the lawyers. I laughed. Now you want privacy? Adele? This doesn't have to be ugly. I paused, tapping my nail against the glass of my water. You made it ugly when you moved half our savings into a shell account and booked a tasting tour with someone who thought NDAs were romantic. He inhaled sharply. I made mistakes, okay? But you're being vindictive. No, I said softly. I'm being accurate. He hung up first. That was his second mistake. Shape our next in-person meeting was at the mediation table. He arrived late again. Eyes tired. Hair messy in the back like he'd started sleeping somewhere less comfortable. He barely looked at me. His lawyer, less smug this time, opened with a low offer, assuming I'd beg for scraps to avoid more courtroom embarrassment. But I had no shame left to weaponize. And I wasn't the one who cheated with a subordinate and lied under oath. Lorraine leaned forward. We'll accept full asset division at market value, control of the vacation properties, and all accounts tied to Adele's inheritance. Plus 60% of the marital estate due to breach of prenup clauses. And, she paused for effect, a public apology. He choked. You want me to apologize? I met his eyes, calm, steady. No. I want you to mean it. But I'll settle for you saying it. Shape he didn't agree. Not then. Not right away. But the walls were closing in. The firm placed him on administrative review. The ethics board opened a formal inquiry. And the paralegal? She disappeared from their sight entirely. Rumor said she was paid off to go quietly. Every tool he'd used to build his image, charm, wealth, credibility, had been flipped. He played chess like a man drunk on power. But I played the long game. And I never moved without purpose. Shape during the third mediation, he cracked. You want to destroy me. I tilted my head. If I did, you'd already be gone. You're not like this. You used to be gentle. I still am, I said quietly. Gentle isn't weak. You just mistook silence for submission. He didn't respond. Because that was the moment he realized what I'd become. A woman who didn't need anger to be dangerous. A woman who wore grace like armor. Shape we settled 2 weeks later. He gave up more than he thought he would. But less than he should have, if karma were measured in dollars. Still. I walked away with enough, financially, emotionally, morally, to never look back. My lawyer called it a win. I called it a correction. Shape, but the best part? The poetic piece? The shell company he used to hide money, the one he formed under a name that mocked my family's initials? It was dissolved by court order and re-registered under mine. I turned it into a fund for women exiting abusive financial marriages. And I named it Dead Weight, LLC. Because if you're going to insult a woman with your mouth, be ready to fund her future with your wallet. Shape people like him never apologize. Not really. But at the final signing, in a private room, he stood across from me and tried. I didn't know you had this in you. That's the thing, I said. You never wanted to know me. You wanted someone who made you feel taller. He swallowed. So this is it? I signed the last line and closed the folder. No. This was it months ago. What comes next? That's mine. I walked out of that room lighter than I'd felt in years. Not because I'd won. But because I'd let go of him, of the lies, of the version of me that begged for crumbs at a table I helped build. I didn't burn the bridge. I built a better one. One with my name on it. A week after the settlement, I bought myself breakfast. Not some sad pastry in a box. I mean real breakfast. A window seat at a French cafe I used to pass on the way to his office. But never entered because I didn't want to spend too much. That morning, I ordered the most expensive thing on the menu. And I didn't look at my phone once. I let the sun warm my face. Let myself breathe as full, deep, unhurried. No more waiting for approval. No more apologies for taking up space. For the first time in years, I belonged entirely to myself. Shape. I spent the first few days alone. Not lonely. Alone. There's a difference. I reclaimed the guest bedroom, turned it into a writing space. Put up shelves he once said would look cluttered. Hung prints from my favorite artists. Lit candles that smelled like things I used to dream about: rain, salt, cedarwood. I let silence return to the house like an old friend. And in that quiet, I remembered her, the Adele who used to write poetry, sketch floor plans, run 5 miles before sunrise just because the air was crisp and clean. She had never left. She'd just been waiting. Shape. I started with small things. Reaching out to old colleagues. Updating my certifications. Sorting through storage boxes like an archaeologist of my own life. Every picture, every forgotten journal entry, was a breadcrumb. Not back to the woman I was, but forward to the one I was ready to become. Shape. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter. No return address. Just a single embossed card tucked inside an envelope. Adele Monroe, it read. Dead Weight. Best name for a fund we've seen in years. Let's talk partnerships. Call me. There was a name, a woman I'd met once at a benefit for domestic advocacy groups. I remembered her sharp eyes and no-nonsense handshake. She hadn't spoken to me that night, but apparently, she had watched. I called. We talked. Then we met. Shape. Within a month, Dead Weight LLC was no longer just a poetic name. It became a movement. A financial education program. A legal aid resource. A digital platform where women as smart, capable, but silenced by shame or money, could get answers, support, options. We didn't sell pity. We sold power. And power attracts attention. Shape. One morning, while reviewing a new pitch deck, I got a message from my assistant. There's a reporter from Beacon Weekly asking for comment. Said it's about your ex-husband. Should I forward? I stared at the screen. Then slowly typed, tell her I'm unavailable. Indefinitely. Because I wasn't going to let his fall become my story. He was a chapter. I was the author. Shape. Still, word traveled fast. Friends I hadn't seen in years called. Some apologized, for not noticing, for staying silent. Some wanted tea. Others just wanted to say, you're incredible. But none of it changed what mattered. I didn't rebuild for applause. I rebuilt because no one was coming to save me. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't need saving. Just remembering. Shape, it's strange what freedom looks like. It's not flashy or loud. It's not revenge fantasies or dramatic exits. It's waking up without dread. It's laughing at a movie and realizing you're not pretending. It's wearing your own name like a crown, not a chain. Shape, one day, while sitting at the same cafe, a man at the next table leaned over. "Excuse me," he said. "This is a little strange, but were you on that panel last week? The one about equity in tech law?" I blinked, surprised. "Yes." "How did you? I'm in policy." "I was there. You said something that stuck with me." "Oh?" "You said, sometimes the smartest thing a woman can do is stop shrinking to be digestible." I smiled. "That sounds like me." He nodded. It was the quote of the night. Then added, "After a pause, you made me rethink a lot. Shape, that's the thing about finding your voice again. You don't raise it to scream. You raise it so other people remember they have one, too." I didn't expect the letter. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address. My assistant placed it on my desk with a raised brow. "Another pitch?" "No idea," I said, though something in my chest had already tightened. The handwriting on the front was familiar, a sharp, slanted scrawl I once adored. Inside, a single page. No greeting. No closing. Just his words. "You won." I hope it was worth it. I don't sleep much these days. People talk. They say you're building something important. I didn't think you'd really go through with it. You were always stronger than I knew. It wasn't an apology. It was a confession. A soft, cowardly one. Like he still couldn't say the words aloud, but needed me to read them for his own absolution. Shape, I folded the paper and slid it into a drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but because it was proof. Not of guilt. Of something better. Regret. The kind that festers when the mask slips, and you finally see the wreckage you caused. Shape, that night, I took a long walk. No music, no calls. Just me. The sound of my boots on pavement, and the weight of memory pressed softly against my ribs. I didn't cry. Didn't rage. Just remembered. How I'd sat across from him at our dining table, 2 years ago, holding out my phone so he could read the names Celeste in his messages. He said, "Don't do this." As if I were the one detonating our life. Shape, I thought about replying to the letter. Writing something poised. Clean. Controlled. But then I imagined him reading it, hunting for weakness in my words, looking for a sign I still needed closure. And that's when I realized something that startled me. I didn't hate him anymore. I just didn't care. Shape, forgiveness is strange. People think it's a gift you give someone else. But it's not. It's a boundary. A line in the sand where you stop bleeding for someone who never bothered to bring bandages. Shape, 2 days later, he called. The number blinked on my phone, unblocked. The same one he'd used for 10 years. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. On the 4th, I answered. Silence. Then, "Adele?" His voice was rough. Tired. That sound people make when they think they're owed a response. "I got your letter," I said. A pause. "I meant it. I believe you. I didn't expect you to fight back like that. I always thought that I was dead weight." I said quietly. More silence. "You know I didn't mean that," he said. I was angry. "No," I replied. "You were honest. That was the first time I'd seen the real you in years. I lost everything." "You didn't lose me," I said. "You threw me away." "That's different." He sighed. "Do you think you'll ever know?" He exhaled. A long, tired sound. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "I'm sure you did." And then, kindly, with the finality of a slammed door, I said. But this voice isn't yours anymore. And I hung up. Shape, I slept well that night. Better than I had in years. Because forgiveness doesn't always come with a hug. Sometimes, it comes with a dial tone. Shape, the next morning, I hosted a workshop for women starting over, fresh out of divorces, layoffs, relocations. They were tired. Brilliant. Brave in the way broken things become when pieced back together with gold. One woman stood and asked, "How did you stop being angry?" And I told her the truth. I didn't. Not at first. I just stopped letting anger be the only thing I carried. Shape, later that week, I found myself staring at an old photo of us. Me in a blue sundress. Him with his arm lazily slung over my shoulder. We were younger. Smiling. Before the slow erosion. I didn't tear it up. Didn't burn it. I just put it away. Because some memories aren't evil, they're just expired. Shape, that month, the foundation gained traction. Articles were written. Interviews requested. Panels invited me to speak. I said yes, to some. No to most. Fame wasn't the goal. Freedom was. And it looked nothing like a podium. It looked like planting a garden in a yard I'd once been too tired to tend. It looked like booking a solo trip with no itinerary. It looked like waking up and saying, "Today is mine." Shape, Chapter 7 comes next, a turning point chapter where Adele meets someone unexpected at an industry event. Leading to new emotional tension and questions of trust, while staying firmly rooted in her power. Would you like to continue with Chapter 7? You said, yes, Vox Script said, perfect, we're entering a new phase in Adele Monroe's story, post-revenge, post-recovery, now facing what comes after the storm. When the world begins to open again, if you let it. Shape 7 950 words. It was a Thursday. Early spring. The kind of day where the air still had a bite, but the sun flirted with the idea of warmth. I was at a private equity panel, one of those high-glass, low-oxygen conference rooms where men wore $800 shoes and smiled like sharks. I wasn't planning to speak. Just observe. Listen. See which of the panelists pretended to believe in social impact funds but still invested in cigarette conglomerates behind the scenes. Then I saw him. Not my ex, someone else. Leaning casually against the catering table, black watch on one wrist, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He was laughing, not loud, not showy. Just real. The kind of laugh that made people lean in. Shape, he looked up. Saw me. And smiled, like he knew me. But he didn't. I was sure of it. Still, he walked over, no hesitation. Adele Monroe? Yes. I've been following your work. Dead Weight, LLC. Brilliant name. Better execution. I blinked. Thanks. Most people just say it's clever. It's more than clever, he said. It's revenge done right. Quiet. Legal. Sharp as glass. That stopped me. I tilted my head. Studying him. And you are? Marcus Layton. I run the legal innovation branch over at Harbridge. Ah. The boutique firm with a reputation for making courtroom miracles. I didn't know Harbridge followed small foundations. He smiled, eyes crinkling slightly. We don't. But I follow storms. You've made a few. Shape, we talked. Just talked. 15 minutes turned into 30. Then someone tapped his shoulder to remind him he was supposed to be on stage in 5. Rain check, he asked, holding up his phone. I hesitated. Long enough for him to notice. He lowered it. No pressure. Just conversation. I promise, no red flags. I've seen red flags in tuxedos, I said. And in churches. He grinned. Fair enough. But something in his expression was different, patient, not pushy. Curious, not hungry. So I gave him my card. Use this wisely. Shape, I didn't expect anything to come of it. But that night, he emailed me a single line, "Your poise has teeth." I admire that. And I felt something strange. Not a flutter. Not heat. Just interest. Clean. Calm. Like the gentle shift of a tide. Shape, Gloria, my therapist, raised an eyebrow when I told her. And how do you feel about that? I don't know yet. Do you want to? I considered that for a long moment. Yes, I said. But only if I can stay me this time. Shape, we met again. Coffee. Then another. Then lunch that wasn't a date, but kind of felt like one. He never asked about my marriage. Never brought up the headlines or the panel soundbites. He asked what I read. What I built before the marriage. What I missed. What I was learning to want again. And I answered. Carefully, then gradually, with more ease than I expected. Shape, one afternoon. I told him a story about how I used to design houses in my journals. How I once dreamed of being an architect before I buried those ambitions under his. Marcus listened. Really listened. Then said, that version of you didn't die. She just went quiet. And I wanted to cry. Not because I was sad. But because someone finally saw all of me and didn't flinch. Shape, still, I moved slowly. One toe at a time back into the water. No plunges. No whirlpools. Just the steady realization that intimacy didn't have to feel like drowning. Shape, one night, over wine and a shared silence too comfortable to ignore. Marcus asked, "Do you still believe in love?" I didn't answer right away. Just watched the candle between us flicker like it was weighing my silence. Then I said, "I believe in clarity. If love can survive that, I'll welcome it." He nodded. Didn't press. Didn't pout. He just said, "Then clarity's what I'll bring." And somehow, that was more romantic than any declaration I'd heard in years. Shape, Chapter 8 comes next. Adele faces an unexpected public encounter with her ex at an industry event, where she must choose between old instincts and new strength, and Marcus witnesses firsthand who she truly is now. Would you like to continue with Chapter 8? You said, yes, Fox Script said, fantastic. Chapter 8 brings Adele Monroe face to face with her past in public, under the watchful eyes of a world that once sided with silence. This is a pivotal moment, not of confrontation, but clarity. Shape, 8 950 words. It was a gallery opening in the West End, modern pieces, uncomfortable shoes. Curated playlists with ironic jazz remixes. I hadn't planned to attend. But Marcus invited me. His firm had sponsored a scholarship featured in one of the installations. And he wanted to support it. It's low stakes, he'd said. Wine, weird sculptures, and 2 hours of pretending to know what abstract realism means. I wore black silk. No jewelry. Hair swept back. Not to impress. Just to feel sharp. Untouchable. We walked in side by side. Not touching, not yet, but tethered in a quiet way that people notice without understanding. Shape, it happened 40 minutes in. I was standing near a wire and glass sculpture shaped like grief when I heard the voice. A beat slower. A shade lower than it used to be. And still, I knew. Adele? I turned. He looked smaller. Not physically, as still the same tall, suited frame, but less, filled in. Like something important had been hollowed out. There were bags under his eyes. His tie wasn't quite straight. He wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize stood beside him, holding 2 flutes of champagne. But the moment he saw me, he froze. Marcus stepped up beside me, a subtle move, respectful. Silent. Just there. My ex's gaze flicked to him. Then back to me. You look, he trailed off. Whole. I offered. You can say it. The man next to him shifted awkwardly. Should we give you 2 a minute? I shook my head. Unnecessary. My ex spoke again. You've made quite a name for yourself. Articles. Interviews. The foundation. I wasn't hiding before, I said. I was just busy surviving. He exhaled. Do you hate me? It was a ridiculous question, especially in public. But I could feel how badly he needed the answer, for his own peace, not mine. So I gave it to him. No, I said. I outgrew the version of me that needed your apology. I could feel people watching. Pretending not to. Even the sculpture behind us seemed to lean in. I made mistakes, he muttered. You made choices, I corrected. Mistakes happen once. You built a pattern. His jaw clenched. I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect you to become a cautionary tale, I replied, evenly. Then I nodded, like I was closing a door. Have a good evening. And turned away. Shape we didn't speak again. Not that night. Not since. And I didn't look back. But I felt him watching me as Marcus took my hand and walked me toward the next room, away from the past. Into something with clean lines and space to breathe. Shape outside, under the gallery's dim lights, Marcus spoke. You didn't flinch, he said. I used to, I replied. Every time he entered a room. Every time I heard his name. My stomach would curl. And now. Now he's just. Someone I used to believe. Shape he didn't kiss me. Not that night. But when he brushed his hand down my arm before opening the car door. The gentleness made something in my chest settle. Not bloom. Not burn. Settle. Like this was how safety sounded when it didn't need to raise its voice. Shape that night. I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. Not about love. Not even about Marcus. But about power. Not the brutal kind. The quiet kind. The kind that lets you walk into a room with your chin high, your scars healed, your story intact, and not need anyone's permission to exist. Shape I wrote, power is being seen exactly as you are, and choosing not to shrink. Closure isn't always words. Sometimes it's just a door that doesn't need to be opened again. The most poetic revenge is being happy in a life you built without their name on it. Shape. Chapter 9 comes next, the deep internal chapter. More reflective, where Adele is asked to give a keynote speech at a major industry event. But what starts as a professional invitation becomes a chance to confront what she's still carrying, and what she's finally ready to release. Would you like to proceed with Chapter 9? You said, yes, VoxScript said, excellent. In Chapter 9, Adele faces a public platform, but instead of using it to relive her pain, she reclaims the narrative entirely. This chapter marks a major emotional pivot in her journey. One of self-possession and resonance. Shape 9950 words. The email came with a subject line that felt too heavy for a Tuesday afternoon, invitation to keynote, Women in Law and Equity Conference theme. Reclaiming power. I stared at it for a long moment. My name in the opening line. My story, the one people thought they knew, referenced delicately, professionally. Your recent work with Deadweight has redefined what it means to turn adversity into impact. We believe your perspective could shape a generation of women navigating power, justice, and recovery. I closed my laptop. Not from fear. Not from anger. Just breathlessness. Because this wasn't just a stage. It was the stage. The one where I'd be expected to talk, truly talk, about everything. Not just the legal battles or the Foundation's mission. But the ache. The betrayal. The becoming. Shape Gloria, when I told her, leaned forward and asked the only question that mattered. Will you speak for them, or for you? I didn't answer right away. But I knew. Deep down, I knew. For both, I finally said. Shape. The day of the conference arrived fast. I stood backstage, clutching a note card I didn't need. Dressed in navy, structured, clean, powerful. The kind of outfit that didn't ask for permission. My name was announced. The applause rolled in. I stepped into the light. Shape. Hundreds of eyes. Rows of them. Some tired, some defiant, some glistening at the corners already. I stood at the podium. And I didn't flinch. Shape, I want to tell you a story, I began. But not the one you think you came here to hear. Small laughter. Quiet, unsure. I continued. It's not a story about being left. It's not even a story about being betrayed. It's about what happens after. After the papers. After the silence. After the rage cools and you're left standing in a house you once built with someone who turned out to be a stranger. It's about the moment you realize your survival wasn't the triumph. Your clarity was. Shape. I didn't name him. Not once. But I saw the nods. The tears. The stiffened shoulders relaxing like someone had finally spoken the words they'd been holding for years. Shape. I was called a dead weight in a room full of people who used to respect me. I said nothing that night. But I heard everything. And I want you to know, your silence in that moment doesn't make you weak. It makes you strategic. There is no power greater than the woman who walks away from humiliation without raising her voice, because she knows justice has already been set in motion. Shape. At one point. Someone in the third row wiped her cheeks with both hands. Another leaned forward, elbows on knees, nodding slowly, like this was scripture. And maybe it was. Not religious. But sacred. The kind of truth you only earn by surviving it. Shape. I ended simply, they called me dead weight. But I became gravity. And everything that tried to rise without me eventually fell. The room exploded. Not just applause. Relief. Recognition. Release. I stepped down from that stage lighter than I'd ever been. Because it was no longer about revenge. It was about resonance. Shape. Afterward. Woman after woman came up to me. I left him 2 weeks ago. My boss said I'd never lead. Now I run my own firm. I didn't know other people had NDAs used against them. Thank you. I nodded. Held hands. Hugged strangers who felt like sisters. And then Marcus appeared, quiet in the back of the hall, coffee in hand, eyes soft. You didn't burn him, he said. No, you buried the version of you that needed his approval. And for the first time that day, I felt my throat tighten. I think she was ready to be free, I whispered. Shape. We left the building hand in hand. I didn't need him to validate me. But walking beside a man who saw me, all of me, and didn't flinch? That was new. And it didn't feel like a sequel. It felt like a different story altogether. Shape. Chapter 10 is next, the final chapter of Part 1 in Adele's journey, closing act I of her new life. It brings the reader to an emotionally redemptive, bittersweet, but empowering resolution before we begin Part 2, which explores her continued evolution, relationships, and legacy. Would you like to continue with Chapter 10? You said, yes, Vox Script said, perfect, let's close the first act of Adele Monroe's cinematic revenge arc with Chapter 10. A chapter of resolution, rebirth, and quiet triumph. This chapter ties together the emotional weight and intelligence she's carried, while setting up a new horizon. Shape. 950 words. A month after the keynote, I stood in the center of what used to be our dining room. The long mahogany table was gone, the one where he used to sit at the head like a king. In its place stood a drafting desk. Sunlight spilling across it like warm paint. The walls had been repainted. No more eggshell beige. His favorite because it was professional. Now they were deep green, the color of moss and rebirth. I'd filled the shelves with books I used to love but never had time to reread. Candles. Sculptures made by women who signed their names with defiance. It didn't look like a home we shared. It looked like mine. Shape I was designing again. Real buildings this time. Small projects, transitional shelters. Women's resource centers, trauma-informed office spaces. Structures meant to hold healing. There was something holy about laying down blueprints for people who were rebuilding. Because I knew how it felt to be rubble. And I knew the secret no one says aloud: you don't start with the roof. You start with the foundation. And the belief that you deserve to stand on something solid. Shape Marcus never rushed me. We weren't labeling things. Not yet. We had dinners. Shared long drives with too much laughter and not enough directions. He sent me voice notes at midnight that said things like, "I hope today didn't ask too much of you, and you don't owe anyone the version of yourself that stayed small." That wasn't romance. That was safety. And I wasn't used to it. But I was learning. Slowly. Shape one afternoon, while sorting old files, I found a photograph. Us. Me and him. From the early years. I was smiling, but my body was angled away from him. Subtle. But clear now. It stunned me how blind I'd been. How much I'd taught myself to shrink. I didn't cry. I just held it for a moment, whispered, "Thank you for the lesson," and fed it through the shredder. Because that's how healing works. You grieve. Then you grow. Then you let go. Shape Gloria asked me once if I thought I'd ever move on. I told her I didn't move on. I moved inward. And I built a life there. Shape the last message he ever sent me came 6 months after the divorce. No subject line. Just 3 words. I still wonder. I didn't reply. Because some chapters don't need sequels. They need silence. And the strength to stop rereading. Shape later that year, Dead Weight LLC was awarded a grant to expand nationally. Our office buzzed with architects, lawyers, survivors turned advocates. We weren't just offering services. We were reteaching women how to carry their own names again. I kept one quote framed on my desk: "They called her dead weight. But she held everything together. And no one noticed until she let go." Shape I walked through the office one afternoon and overheard a woman, maybe 25, telling a client on the phone. "No. Don't apologize. You didn't ruin your marriage by wanting more. You rescued yourself by refusing less." I had to step into the hallway for a moment. Not to cry. Just to breathe in the truth that my pain had become something useful. Honest. Sharp enough to protect, but soft enough to teach. Shape that night, Marcus cooked dinner. He danced while stirring a pot of something with too much time, and I laughed, leaning against the counter. "This isn't where I thought I'd end up," I said softly. He glanced at me. "Is that good or bad?" "Neither," I said. "It's just free." He nodded. "You ever miss her?" "Who?" "The version of you who loved him." I thought about it. Then answered, "No." Because I only loved him with the parts of me that didn't know better. Shape after dinner, he played jazz, a real jazz, not the gala kind. I leaned my head on his shoulder. Not to be held. Just to rest. Shape, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt what power was without revenge, without rage, without needing to prove anything. I felt whole. Not in spite of what happened. But because I had refused to stay broken. It started with a photo. Not one I posted. I never did. Someone at a panel snapped it, me standing at the edge of a stage, mid-sentence. Hand slightly raised, mouth half open like I was telling the truth too fast to stop. The caption read, "This woman didn't burn bridges. She rebuilt the road." It went viral in a matter of days. Not millions. But just enough. Enough to start the interviews. The speaking invitations. The quiet emails that began with, "I saw your story. I think I need help too." Shape one morning, I opened a message from a woman in Iowa. Her husband was a judge. She hadn't spoken to her family in years. I used to believe I was broken. Then I read your words. And I realized I was just surviving in a house that wasn't built for me. I cried. Quietly. Not from sadness. From recognition. Because there's a strange ache in knowing you weren't alone, and a deeper one in realizing so many still are. Shape Marcus watched the momentum build with his usual calm. He never made it about him. Never used my name to impress people. He once said, "The best kind of man is the one who walks beside a powerful woman and doesn't need to hold the flashlight." I told him, "You just don't want me pointing it at you." He grinned. "You wouldn't. Too bright." Shape, but with recognition came tension. Some said I was too polished to be authentic. Others whispered that I must have had help, a PR team, a wealthy family, a secret male investor. One journalist even asked, "Do you think you're turning personal pain into a brand?" I paused. Thought about it. Then answered, "No." I turned silence into structure. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you should ask why you're more at ease with a woman in ruins than a woman rebuilding. Shape, I kept going. Panels. Workshops. Grant proposals. But in the quiet hours, something else began to stir. Not fear. Not doubt. Weight. The weight of being seen. Not just as a survivor, or an expert, or even a leader, but as a symbol. And symbols don't get to break. Shape, one night, I told Gloria, "I feel like I built this machine that runs on my pain. And if I stop feeding it, the whole thing will fall apart." She looked at me. Patient as always. "Then maybe it's time to build a new machine." Shape, that idea stayed with me. For days, weeks. Until one afternoon, while reviewing another success story, I asked myself a question I hadn't considered in a long time. What do I want now? Not what I escaped from. Not what I built out of necessity. But what do I actually desire, on purpose, for me? The question landed like a stone at the bottom of a still lake. I didn't have the answer. Not yet. But I was finally ready to find it. Shape, so I took a risk. I delegated. I stepped back from the daily grind of Deadweight, LLC, appointed a board. Promoted 3 women I trusted to manage the operations. They were shocked. "But it's your story." I smiled. "And now it's ours." They didn't need me to be the hero. They needed space to become their own. Shape, I spent that month resting. Not just physically. Spiritually. Reading again. Sketching again. Walking barefoot in places that didn't care about keynotes or equity audits. Marcus noticed. "You're softer," he said one evening. "Like you're no longer waiting for someone to swing at you." I stopped bracing, I said. "Turns out, the punches aren't coming. And if they do, I don't break. I bend." Shape, we went to a cabin for a weekend. Just us, no agenda. There was rain on the roof. A fire with too much smoke. And a chessboard we never finished because we were too busy making breakfast at noon and asking questions like, "What would your 14-year-old self think of you now?" I said, "She'd think I took too long to leave." Marcus said, "She'd be proud you never gave up." I wasn't healed. Not fully. But I was healing, which is a verb. A process. A choice I made every day. I refused to shrink again. The invitation arrived in a black envelope. Embossed. Heavy. Inside, a formal letter with expensive margins and a signature that once made headlines. "We'd be honored to welcome Adele Monroe as the newest board member of the Faro Group. We believe your unique perspective and commitment to social equity would elevate our mission." I stared at the paper. Then read it again. The Faro Group. Legacy investment firm. Global reach. Billion-dollar ventures. The same group that once dismissed my early grant proposal without a response. The same firm where my ex once pitched and failed and blamed me for the distraction. It was poetic. Too poetic. Shape Marcus raised an eyebrow when I told him. That's no small offer. No, I said. It's a throne. The question is, what does it cost to sit there? Shape, I did my research. Deeply. Pharaoh had a glossy image, inclusion, sustainability, impact. But under the surface? They'd funded corporations with histories of union busting. Backed tech companies that used unethical data mining. They supported change. Sure, but only after their bottom line was guaranteed. And now? Now they wanted me to be their moral alibi. The woman with the tragic past. The elegant comeback. The clean conscience. Shape, I met with them anyway. Out of curiosity. Out of strategy. 3 men in sharp suits. 1 woman, younger, ambitious. Eyes flicking between me and the board chair like she'd memorized every step. We believe in evolution, the chair said smoothly. You represent the new standard of integrity. Transparency. We want your voice at the table. But not too loud, I said, folding my hands. Right? A flicker of discomfort passed between them. The woman smiled tightly. Of course we want boldness. That's why you're here. No, I replied calmly. I'm here because you need cover. And I don't do camouflage. Shape, they offered 7 figures. A corner office. Equity. Speaking platforms that would put me in front of the world. It should have been a dream. But dreams, I've learned, sometimes wear wolves' teeth under velvet. Shape, that night, I sat in my kitchen, wine untouched, and stared out at the skyline. Years ago, I would have said yes. Eager. Hungry. Needing to prove something. But now? I had nothing left to prove. Just something left to protect. Shape, Gloria said, there's power in saying yes. But there's integrity in knowing when to say no. So I wrote them a letter. Short. Clean. Final. Thank you for the offer. I respectfully decline. Leadership without accountability is not leadership. And I will not trade my voice for volume. Shape, the response was silence. Then, a week later, an op-ed surfaced, unnamed sources suggesting I was difficult to work with. Uncompromising. Naive about the realities of global enterprise. I smiled when I read it. Because when men protect their empires, they call it strategy. But when a woman protects her standards, they call it pride. Shape, Marcus offered to make a call. I know who placed that piece. I can get it retracted. No, I said. Let them print what they want. The right people will read between the lines. Shape, 3 days later, I got an email from a whistleblower at Pharaoh. A woman. Early 30s. Assistant VP. Saw what they did. I'm leaving soon. You gave me the courage. We don't need your name on their masthead. We need your name on the movement. Shape, that's when it hit me. Power isn't in titles. It's not in seats at tables built by men who only set places for decoration. It's an influence, the kind you earn by standing alone. Even when the room wants you silent. And if I had to stand alone to show one woman she could walk away, too? That was worth more than any boardroom. I didn't lose power that week. I defined it. Not by what I said yes to, but by what I refused to become. Her name was Marin. Once. She was my closest friend. College roommate. Maid of honor. Emergency contact. The kind of person who knew your coffee order, your fears. Your mother's birthday, without needing to be reminded. She was also the first to pull away when the cracks in my marriage started showing. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just subtly. Calls that went unanswered. Brunches rescheduled, then cancelled. A smile that dimmed each time I spoke my truth out loud. I didn't blame her. Not then. I just marked it. Like a storm cloud you don't trust but pretend won't rain. Shape now, 6 years later, her name blinked on my screen. Subject, it's been a long time. Message, Adele, I've followed everything. I wasn't brave back then. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness. But I'd like to see you. Coffee? My treat. If not for me, then for closure. Marin shape closure. It always sounds so neat, doesn't it? Like it's something you order in a cup. But I wasn't the same woman she abandoned. And I didn't need closure. I needed honesty. Shape still, I agreed to meet. Not for her. For me. Because sometimes healing means looking the ghost in the eye and saying, I survived you, too. Shape we met at a cafe downtown. Not our usual place, that one had closed during the pandemic, but somewhere new. When I walked in, she stood immediately. Still tall. Still stylish. But her smile didn't reach her eyes this time. Adele, she breathed. You look unstoppable. I sat. That's because I stopped waiting for people to hold the rope. She flinched slightly. Fair. Shape there was a pause. Then, I was scared, back then. When things started falling apart for you. I know, I said calmly. You weren't the only one. But I should have stood by you. You didn't. That's what matters. Shape she stirred her coffee like it held secrets. I believed him, she said. He said you were unraveling. Controlling. That you didn't support him. I blinked. Once. Slowly. And it was easier to believe that, I said. She nodded. I didn't want to think he was capable of that. Then you didn't know me. And you didn't want to. Shape she looked up. Eyes glassy. I'm sorry. I nodded. I believe you. Another long silence. I want to make it right, she added. Whatever that means. I looked at her for a long time. This woman who once held my secrets in her palms. And then let them fall when they got too heavy. And then I said, you don't need to make it right. You just need to leave it true. Shape her brow furrowed. I don't understand. You believed him. You left. And now you feel guilty because I didn't stay broken. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I continued, what you want isn't forgiveness. It's relief. Her hands trembled slightly. So you won't? I already did, I said. But that doesn't mean you get to sit beside me again. Shape we parted without hugs. No anger. No drama. Just a space where a friendship used to be, now filled with truth instead of hope. And somehow, that felt cleaner. Stronger. Like a door finally closed, not slammed, but sealed. Shape later that night, I told Marcus. Do you regret meeting with her? He asked. No, I said. Regret belongs to her. I only carry lessons now. Shape that weekend, I wrote a letter I never sent, to the ones who left when I was hard to love. Thank you for teaching me what love isn't. To the ones who only returned when I healed, please know, I didn't heal to be soft. I healed to be sharp enough to choose. Shape there is a myth that healing is a full circle, that we come back to the beginning, whole. But I think it's more like a spiral. You return to the same themes. The same faces. But each time, you're higher. Wiser. More yourself than you've ever been. The email subject line was polite. Professional. Too clean to mean what it meant. Panel opportunity, national broadcast, women. wealth and power, we would be honored to feature you in our upcoming televised discussion on gendered financial dynamics, visibility, and survival. The conversation will include multiple voices, including legal professionals, therapists, and notable former spouses who've publicly navigated complex divorces. I knew exactly what that last line meant. And still, I scrolled to the bottom. There it was, confirmed guest, Lucian Monroe. My ex-husband. The same man who once told a room I was dead weight, while I stood 6 feet away. Shape Marcus was in the kitchen when I read it. He looked up from slicing peaches and instantly knew. What's wrong? I handed him my phone. He read it. Twice. Then said, "Tell me how you want to play this." I didn't answer right away. Because I didn't know. Shape, there was a time I would have leapt at the chance. A public stage. A chance to expose him. To show the world, live, unfiltered, who he really was. But that woman, the one with fire behind her teeth? She'd already had her moment. And she'd chosen justice over rage. Shape, I called Gloria. Told her about the invitation. About Lucian. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Would you be going for the cause, or for the confrontation?" I didn't flinch. "Both," I admitted. "Then be careful," she said. "Because the cause deserves your clarity. But confrontation will demand your peace." Shape, that night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city breathe. Lucian had fallen off the radar after the divorce. He'd lost board seats. His firm had quietly phased him out. He wasn't the power broker he once was. Now, he was a man clinging to visibility. Hoping to rewrite his narrative under the glow of studio lights. He wanted redemption. Or at least a share of mine. Shape, I slept on it. In the morning, I wrote the producers back. "Thank you for the invitation. I support the mission of highlighting women's financial experiences. However, I no longer participate in spaces where my presence could be used to sanitize the stories of those who once silenced me." Shape, they replied quickly. "We understand and respect your decision. If you'd ever consider a solo feature, we'd be honored to host you." I didn't reply. Some doors are better left unopened. Shape, the next day, I received a short, unsigned message in my foundation inbox. "You missed your shot. Now I get to tell my side." No name. No contact. But I knew the voice. Lucian always did mistake silence for surrender. Shape, Marcus came home with flowers that night. No reason. No occasion. Just flowers. He said, "You're too smart for bait." "I know," I replied. "But I wanted to burn him," I added quietly. "Of course you did. And I didn't. That's why you win." Shape, a week later, the episode aired. I didn't watch. But I heard from friends who did. Lucian said all the right things. Talked about growth. Regret. How power distorts priorities. He never said my name. But everyone knew who he meant. He was careful. Scripted. Tired. And when the applause came, it was polite. Measured. Nothing like the force that had carried my words. Shape, I didn't need a rebuttal. I already had the truth. Etched into bank records. Court transcripts. And the quiet, steady lives I was helping other women rebuild. Shape, that same week, a new grant came through. Dead Weight would now expand into 4 more states, adding trauma-informed legal advisors and financial exit planning for women fleeing economic abuse. Impact over attention. That was the game now. Shape, I sat at my desk, fingers resting on the edge of the file. Then I opened a blank sheet and began to write a different kind of letter. Not to him. Not to the world. To myself. You were never dead weight. You were ballast. The very thing that kept everything from tipping over until you let go. And then it was them who couldn't balance. The email subject line was plain, from Professor Ilara Jensen, subject, proud of you. I stopped breathing for a second. Professor Jensen. My architecture mentor at Stonehill. The first person who said I had vision. The first woman who told me, you see space the way poets see language. I hadn't heard from her in over a decade. Not since I changed majors. Not since Lucian convinced me law was more practical. I clicked the message. Adele, I saw your name in a design journal, the article about trauma-informed architecture. I knew it was you the moment I saw the line work. It always was. Would love to reconnect. I'm teaching a series at Halston now. If you're ever in town, there's always a seat in the front row. Ilara shape. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Because that message felt like something I hadn't allowed myself to want, to be seen by someone who never needed me to fall apart to admire my strength. Shape. I booked the train the next day. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't even bring my laptop. Just a sketchbook. A pen. And my own name. Whispered like a secret I was finally ready to say out loud. Shape. Halston had changed. New wings. Brighter walls. But the lecture hall was the same, rows of tiered seats and that faint smell of dust, pencil shavings, and ambition. I slipped into the back just as she stepped up to the podium. She was older, grayer. Still wore black turtlenecks like armor. Still commanded a room with nothing but posture and truth. She looked up mid-slide, paused, and smiled. Not politely. Proudly. Shape. After class, I stayed behind. She walked straight toward me and wrapped me in a hug that smelled like graphite and jasmine. Adele, she said. It's good to have you back. I didn't think you'd remember. Her smile turned knowing. Some students leave you. Others leave a mark. You were always the latter. Shape. We sat in her office, sunlight painting gold stripes across the cluttered desk. I read about dead weight, she said. And your designs. You never stopped being an architect. You just forgot for a while. I forgot a lot, I said softly. But not forever, she replied. You're proof of that. Shape. She pulled out a folder, my final project from her studio class. Shelter for the soul, she read aloud. You were designing safe spaces long before you knew how much you'd need them. I laughed. Then blinked fast. Because suddenly I was 20 again, full of quiet brilliance I hadn't known how to carry. I still don't know if I'm doing enough, I said. You're not supposed to finish the work, Adele, she said. You're supposed to pass it on. Shape. That night, I walked through the old campus. Not for nostalgia. For closure. The good kind. The kind that doesn't ache, it anchors. Shape. I stopped in front of the old dorm where Marin and I once stayed up all night planning futures that never happened. I didn't mourn that. I just smiled at the girl I used to be. The one who dreamed of blueprints and boldness. She hadn't vanished. She'd just gone into hiding. Now. She had keys again. Shape. Before I left town, Ilara handed me a manila envelope. Don't open this until you're home, she said. I promised I wouldn't. Shape. That night. Back in my study, I peeled it open. Inside, my student file. She had saved it. All these years. Instructor notes. Early sketches. A letter of recommendation she wrote, and never sent, when she heard I was changing majors. Adele Monroe has an unmatched sense of spatial empathy. She doesn't just design buildings. She listens to what the walls want to hold. I read it twice. Then I framed it. Not to brag. To remember. Because sometimes we don't need new validation. We just need to reclaim the truths we abandoned for survival. Shape. Later that week. I donated funding for 10 architecture scholarships in Ilara's name. One of them, the largest, was specifically for women over 30 returning to the field after career interruptions. We called it the return grant. Because no dream dies quietly. And no woman is too far gone to start again. I was scheduled to speak in Amsterdam. A global summit on trauma-informed design, my name printed beside architects, lawyers, and policymakers I once thought lived in another galaxy. Marcus kissed my forehead at the airport. "You're ready for this," he said. "Not just professionally. Personally." I smiled. He was right. I wasn't nervous. I was steady. Until my phone buzzed in the gate lounge. Unknown number. Local area code. A voicemail. Something in my spine tightened. I pressed play. "Ms. Monroe, this is St. James Memorial. Your mother, Eleanor, has been admitted. She listed you as next of kin. It's serious. You'll want to come." Shape. I stood. Stared at nothing. My mother. A name that felt like a closed drawer in the attic of my life. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since the 3rd year of my marriage, when I told her Lucian was cold, manipulative. She said, "He's a good provider. What more do you want?" We never recovered. Shape. I cancelled the flight. Marcus offered to come. I said no. This was something I had to do alone. Not out of pride. But because some wounds require witnessing, not comfort. Shape. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers. Room 308. A bed surrounded by pale curtains. Machines whispering in the background. She looked smaller. The woman who raised me with discipline sharp enough to draw blood. Who believed softness was danger. Who said love was earned through obedience, not presence. Her eyes opened when I entered. She blinked. Then said, without strength or venom. "You came." I did. She nodded. Looked away. Shape. There wasn't much time. Her condition was terminal. A neurological failure that would progress fast. I sat by the bed. Unmoving. Not waiting for apology. Just being. Shape. She spoke again later. "Your father was cruel to me. I didn't know how to love without rules." I nodded. I figured. I wasn't fair to you. That's true. I thought if I raised you to be strong, you'd survive anything. You didn't raise me to be strong, I said softly. You raised me to be silent. She closed her eyes. 2 tears escaped. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I accept it," I said. And I did. Not because she deserved forgiveness. But because I deserved freedom. Shape. She died 2 days later. Peacefully. Quietly. No dramatic final words. Just an inhale that never exhaled. I sat with her body. Held her hand. And said, goodbye, to the woman she was, and the girl I used to be who kept trying to earn her. Shape. The funeral was small. Closed casket. Rain on the roof. A handful of women from her church who wore polite smiles and offered casseroles. Marcus came. Stood at the back. Never asked for space I wasn't ready to give. After the service, one of the women approached me. "I taught Sunday school with your mother," she said. "She always bragged about you. Even when she said she didn't understand you." That sentence pierced me more than any lecture she ever gave. She didn't understand you. Not didn't love. Didn't understand. And sometimes, those two things grow so far apart you forget they ever met. Shape. After everyone left, I stayed. Pulled out the only photo I had of us, me at 7, in a red sweater. Her standing behind me. Hand on my shoulder like she wasn't sure what to do with it. I whispered, "You tried." I tried harder. And that's okay. Then I tucked the photo into the flowers and walked away. Shape. Grief is strange when it's not clean. When it doesn't come with music swells or montages. When it's layered, not just sadness, but relief, and ache, and peace all tangled in one. I didn't cry on the drive home. I rolled down the windows. Let the air in. Let it take the dust of that history with it. Back at home, Marcus met me on the porch. I didn't speak. Just leaned into him. And for the first time in my life, I let someone hold me without earning it first. Later that night, I wrote a letter in my journal. To the mother who couldn't teach me softness, thank you for giving me the kind of strength that didn't need permission. I made something beautiful with it anyway. I returned to the office 3 days after the funeral. The lobby felt familiar. My name still on the wall. The scent of fresh coffee and eucalyptus still in the air. But something was off. Too quiet. Too still. My assistant met me at the elevator. I'm glad you're back, she said, eyes serious. There's something you need to know. Shape It had started with a press release. A junior administrator, new, eager. Undertrained, greenlit a partnership with a fintech startup that, on the surface, promised financial literacy for survivors. What they didn't see, the fine print. The terms of service that allowed the company to harvest user data. Even sell it. Someone on Twitter noticed. Then someone on LinkedIn. Then the local paper. Within 48 hours. The name Deadweight, LLC was trending, and not in a good way. Shape Elena, the director I'd appointed in my absence, met me in the boardroom. Her eyes were red. Jaw tense. Adele, I take full responsibility. It was a mistake. I approved the release without double-checking their policies. She slid the documents toward me. I didn't see the predatory clause. I missed it. And now it's spiraling. I read. Quiet. Careful. The damage was real. Trust was shaken. But it was the apology that stood out, printed in her hand, not typed. This was not carelessness. It was eagerness. I believed a good pitch. I didn't think like a survivor. I forgot to distrust first. Shape in that moment. I had 2 options. The same ones I had once wished someone had offered me. Punishment. Or mentorship. Shape, I looked at her. Do you know what my ex-husband once said to me? She blinked, startled. No. He said, you're too careful. That's why you'll never lead anything important. I tapped the documents. This mistake? It proves the opposite. We lead because we learn. Shape, I called a full team meeting. Not to scold. To teach. To model. And to reaffirm one truth, we are not the women who shame each other for learning in real time. We are the women who double down on transparency. Fix our own leaks, and tell the truth before anyone else can twist it. Shape, we issued a formal retraction. Pulled out of the partnership. Released a statement, not defensive, not corporate, but personal. We got it wrong. Here's how. Here's how we'll do better. It landed. Not perfectly. But honestly. And honesty, I've learned, is a longer-lasting currency than perfection. Shape, later that week, Elena came to my office. I thought you'd fire me, she admitted. If I fired everyone who ever missed a detail, I'd be the only one left here. She smiled. Small. Grateful. But this is your story, she said. I nearly ruined it. No, I corrected her. This story belongs to every woman who refuses to collapse under pressure. That includes you. Shape, that night. I walked past the boardroom again. Empty now. Lights low. And I remembered something my mother said, once, in a rare moment of softness. Leadership isn't about being followed. It's about who you stay beside when they're afraid they've failed. Shape, I wasn't building a foundation of women who never faltered. I was building one where faltering didn't mean falling through. And if we were going to survive, we had to be the kind of women who held each other up, not just accountable. Marcus never rushed me. Not when I held grief like a shield. Not when I built walls lined with law, steel, and perfectly filed documents. Not when I said things like, "I like the idea of love more than its reality." He just stayed. Quiet. Steady. Never asking me to step forward, only promising not to let me fall when I did. So when he asked to make dinner Friday night, I thought nothing of it. We'd had dozens of quiet dinners. Wine. Jazz. Something roasted. Something sweet. And sometimes, silence that didn't need to be filled. But that night was different. He made my favorite, mushroom risotto, too much time again. Because he still hadn't figured out how to measure with anything but instinct. Candles. A record playing in the background. I watched him move through the kitchen. At home in a way that didn't feel like invasion. Not like him. Lucian had always filled a room like a performance. Marcus, just fit. We ate. We laughed. Talked about cities we hadn't visited yet, and ideas we hadn't written down, and books that changed us before we even understood why. Then he stood, walked around the table. And knelt beside me. Not with a box. Just with intention. "Adele," he said, voice calm, eyes fixed on mine. "I'm not asking for marriage. I'm not even asking for forever." I didn't breathe. "I'm asking if you'll let me build something with you. Not over what was broken. Not in place of what hurt. But beside what healed." For a moment, the room was silent. My hands were still. My heart wasn't. Because no one had ever asked me that before. Not if I loved them. But if I could build with them. He didn't want to save me. He wanted to share the weight. I reached out. Touched his face. And whispered, yes. We didn't toast. Didn't call anyone. Didn't document it for show. We just sat on the floor, backs against the wall, knees touching. And I thought about how strange it was to feel peace where once I'd only known performance. Later that night, in bed. He asked, "Do you still believe people can change?" I thought about Lucian. About my mother. About myself. "Yes," I said. "But only if they want to. And most don't want change, they want comfort." He nodded. "What do you want now?" "Peace," I whispered. "Real peace. And rooms I don't have to shrink in." He kissed my temple. "Then let's build those rooms. Together." The next morning, he handed me a sketchbook. Clean. Blank. No lines. "For whatever comes next," he said. I opened it. On the first page, he'd written, "Not all foundations have to be made of stone. Some are made of survival, trust, and a second chance." That afternoon, I sat in my sunroom. Sketching. Not designs. Not shelters. Just spaces. The kind I'd never known but had always imagined, a kitchen that holds laughter. A library where no one is interrupted. A hallway where no one tiptoes. I realized I wasn't just building programs anymore. Or foundations. Or revenge disguised as justice. I was building a life. Not because I'd won. But because I'd healed enough to imagine a world beyond winning. The call came on a Monday morning. Government line. Blocked number. A male voice, professional. Warm in a way that felt practiced. "Adele Monroe?" "Yes. This is Director Fallon, Office of Financial Protections and Equity Affairs. We've been watching your work." I waited. "We'd like to formally invite you to lead a national task force. We're drafting new legislation on financial abuse protections." I sat straighter. "And you want my voice?" He chuckled. "More than your voice. We want your framework." It was an offer that could change everything. A federal seat. Real policy impact. Not just speaking panels or nonprofit whispers. This was law. Legislation. Legacy. I should have felt proud. But something in me went still. Because I'd seen this before. How powerful rooms pull women in. Then polish them down to nothing. Shape. The official meeting was held 2 weeks later in D.C., 12 seats. 11 men. 1 woman and me. They smiled. They referenced my articles. They called me articulate. One of them even said, "You're a perfect symbol for how far we've come." I blinked. Once. A symbol? I asked. He nodded. You've overcome so much. People love stories like yours. I leaned forward. Then let's not forget, my story didn't end in a TED Talk. It ended in a courtroom. In documents, in policy proposals you've yet to pass. Silence. Then the chair cleared his throat. Of course. Yes. That's why you're here. But I saw it. The flicker of discomfort. They didn't want my clarity. They wanted my composure. Shape. We spent 2 days drafting frameworks. They proposed opt-in clauses for financial protection. I proposed mandatory disclosure, survivor counseling, and stiff penalties for coercive debt. One of the men said, "That's aggressive." I looked him in the eye. So, is a man draining a woman's bank account and calling it love? Shape. Back in the hotel that night, I called Marcus. Tell me I'm not being difficult. He laughed. You're not being difficult. I don't think they want reform. I think they want performance. Then don't perform. Push. Shape. The next morning, I handed out a new draft proposal. Tighter. Harsher. Real. Financial abuse isn't vague, I said. It's digital. It's legal. It's personal. And if this bill reads like a pamphlet, it'll die like one. One of the older men scoffed. You're asking for a lot. I smiled. So were the women who asked you to listen 10 years ago. And look how long that took. Shape. That afternoon, the chair approached me privately. You know we respect your experience. No, I said, you respect my image. You haven't decided if you respect my standards yet. He sighed. Help me sell this to Congress. I nodded. I will. But not at the expense of the people you claim to protect. I've spent too long rebuilding my voice to lend it to people who will twist it. Shape. The final draft passed with my version intact. Not all of it. Not perfectly. But the core stayed. Mandatory financial education for divorce proceedings. Digital trail protections. Coercive debt classification as abuse. Federal matching funds for survivors escaping economic dependency. They called it the Monroe Amendment. I didn't smile when it passed. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Because now, if even one woman was spared the kind of silence I lived through, it was enough. Shape. That night, I stood on the Capitol steps. Alone. Not for the photo. Not for the applause. Just to feel the weight of it all. Not the power. Not the title. The impact. Shape. Marcus texted, tell me how it feels. I typed, like I walked into the room where they once decided my worth without me, and changed the locks. Shape. Chapter 20 comes next, a pivotal chapter that brings the past full circle. Adele receives a letter from Lucian, the final one. No manipulation, no spin. Just truth. But it's not the letter that changes her. It's how she responds to it, and who she becomes after. Would you like to continue with chapter 20? You said, yes, Vox Script said, perfect, you've reached a crucial emotional climax in Adele Monroe's journey. In chapter 20, the story takes a reflective turn. Not to reopen wounds, but to examine what's left after true closure, not from the one who hurt you, but from within yourself. Shape 2950 words. It came in a thin envelope. No stamp. Hand-delivered to the Foundation's office by courier. No sender name. Just my name, written carefully. Like he took his time. Lucian's handwriting hadn't changed. Still sharp. Still leaning to the right. Like it was always one step ahead of itself. Shape. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on my desk for 3 days. Moved it from one corner to the next. I told myself it didn't matter. That I'd long stopped needing anything from him. But eventually, I opened it. Because strength doesn't always mean shutting the door. Sometimes, it means looking through it and deciding not to walk back in. Shape. Adele, I've written this letter dozens of times. Torn them all up. This is the only one that didn't start with excuses. You were never dead weight. You were ballast. The only thing keeping me steady. And I was too selfish to see it. I see it now. I see all of it. You didn't just leave me. You revealed me. To myself. To the world. And in doing so, you became what I never had the courage to be. I'm not asking for a response. I don't deserve one. I just want you to know, you were right. You were always right. A Shape. I read it once. Then again. Then placed it in the drawer of my desk labeled past. Because that's where it lived now. Filed. Finished. Respected, but not returned to. Shape. I didn't feel triumphant. Just still. It wasn't a letter that healed me. It wasn't his words that gave me peace. It was the fact that I no longer needed them. Shape. That night. I stood on the balcony of my home. The one I bought with my own name. With my own money. With no initials carved into the door that weren't mine. I held a glass of wine in one hand, the city blinking below like it was nodding along with my thoughts. Marcus came outside, stood behind me. Didn't ask what I was thinking. He didn't need to. He knew. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the moment you no longer look over your shoulder when you speak. Shape. You okay? He asked, gently. I nodded. He wrote. I figured he would eventually. I didn't respond. Marcus nodded once. You didn't need to. I turned to face him. It's strange. I spent so long wanting him to see what he did. Now that he does, it feels like nothing. That's not nothing, Marcus said. That's growth. Shape. Later. As we got ready for bed, I placed the letter in a box on the top shelf of my closet. Not out of fear. But as a reminder that part of me existed. And she survived. Shape. The next morning, I woke with an idea. Not a business plan. Not a lawsuit. Not a speech. A blueprint. For a building I dreamed of but never dared sketch. Not for shelters. Not for offices. But a house. One that wasn't built around someone else's needs. One that wasn't shaped by survival. A space for rebirth. Natural light. Quiet corners. Bookshelves that reached the ceiling. A kitchen that opened into a garden, not a hallway. And at the center, a study with one window, facing east. To remind me that beginnings don't have to come after endings. They can come with them. Shape. Chapter 21 comes next. We begin the final stretch. Adele breaks ground on her personal legacy project, a sanctuary for women in transition. But just as she prepares to launch, an unexpected figure from her past returns, not Lucian, but someone who once stayed silent when Adele needed them most. Would you like to continue with Chapter 21? You said, yes, Fox Script said, excellent, welcome to Chapter 21, the beginning of the final act of Adele Monroe's story. The revenge has passed. The rebuilding is underway. But healing is not a straight line, and the past always has one more test before peace becomes permanent. Shape 21 950 words. The land was quiet. 3 acres just outside the city, rolling grass, a winding gravel drive, and oak trees tall enough to hold the wind. It was the first space I bought for no reason other than desire. No strategy. No fundraising pitch. No headlines. Just me. A sketchbook. And a vision I hadn't been brave enough to chase until now. Shape. I called it the Anchor House. Not a shelter. Not a facility. A sanctuary. For women in transition. Not just escaping something, but moving towards something else. There'd be rooms with light. Soundproofed meditation spaces. Art supplies. Legal advisors. An on-site architect to teach design skills, because sometimes healing starts with a pencil and a blank page. I didn't want them to just rest here. I wanted them to reclaim. Shape. The groundbreaking ceremony was small. No ribbon. Just a few women I trusted, Marcus, and the team who had helped me plan it. We each took turns pressing our palms into a patch of wet cement, not for decoration, but for declaration. We were here. We endured. And now, we build. Shape. The next day, I received a message. A name I hadn't seen in years. Margot. My former boss. The one who had once praised Lucian's leadership, while quietly implying that I was lucky to be married to someone so driven. She'd been at the firm where he worked. Where I was invited to functions, then expected to smile and stay silent. When everything collapsed, she never reached out. Not a call. Not a word. But now. Subject: congratulations. Message: Adele, I read about the Anchor House. I don't expect you to remember me kindly. But I'd like to help, if there's still room for someone who stayed silent longer than they should have. Margot. Shape. I stared at the screen. There it was again, closure, knocking. But this time, wearing a different face. Shape. I met her for coffee. Same cafe. Different table. I chose one by the window, light falling across my hands like a spotlight I no longer feared. Margot arrived 10 minutes early. Still composed. Still elegant. But this time, her voice held no performance. Adele, she said. Thank you for seeing me. I almost didn't. I know, she said. And I wouldn't have blamed you. Shape. We talked. Carefully. She didn't justify. Didn't grovel. Just admitted. I believed what he told me. And I didn't ask questions because it was easier to believe a man who looked like a success than a woman who looked like she was breaking. I nodded. I wasn't breaking. I was waking up. Her eyes filled. I see that now. Shape. She slid a folder across the table. Blueprints, she said. For a mobile version of the Anchor House. A pilot idea I've been funding quietly. But I don't want to lead it. I want you to. I opened the folder. Clean. Smart. Scalable. It could change everything. Shape. I closed the folder. Met her eyes. I don't need your penance. I know, she said. But you might need the power I still have. And I'd rather lend it to you than spend it protecting men like him. Shape. That night. I stood in front of the Anchor House site. The foundation was being poured. Concrete setting into place. The ground ready to hold what came next. I didn't know if I trusted Margot. But I trusted myself to decide. Because that's what healing becomes, eventually. Not the absence of fear. But the clarity to choose anyway. Shape. Later, I asked Marcus, is it foolish to partner with someone who once stayed silent? He didn't answer right away. Then he said. Not if her silence taught her how to listen now. Shape. The next morning, I called Margot. We'll do the pilot, I said. But I lead it. Not you. She exhaled. Understood. And I don't want your guilt. You'll get my funding. My team. And my name, use the way you see fit. I paused. Then said, good. Because I'm not here to rewrite the past. I'm here to redirect the future. Shape Chapter 22 comes next, a chapter of public triumph. Adele gives a keynote speech at the Anchor House launch. But when a young woman in the audience challenges her with a painful, honest question, Adele must decide whether she still lives in her past, or is truly ready to let it go. Would you like to continue with Chapter 22? You said, yes, Fox Script said, fantastic. In Chapter 22, we step into a moment of public power, where Adele Monroe stands fully in the light she once thought she'd never reach. But that spotlight comes with reflection, and a question that forces her to redefine what survival means when the wounds stop bleeding, but never quite disappear. Shape 22 950 words. The opening of the Anchor House didn't look like a ceremony. It looked like arrival. Dozens of women lined the front courtyard, survivors, donors, builders, architects, and advocates, all standing in a circle as the sun poured through the early October trees. No media. No flashbulbs. Just one microphone. A handmade banner strung between two beams, and chairs lined in imperfect rows like they belonged to someone real. Marcus stood in the back. His camera slung over his shoulder but unused. He knew better than to frame this. This wasn't his story. It was mine, and hers, and theirs, and ours. Shape. I stood at the podium, a quiet hum beneath my ribs. No index cards. No speech. Just breath. And then, words. They say survival is quiet. But they're wrong. Survival echoes. It lingers in the way we hold keys, count our steps, reread every message. And healing? Healing is not an end. It's a house. One we build by hand, even when our hands still shake. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reverent. I looked around and saw tears. Not tragic. Not weak. Sacred. Proof that every word had landed. Not like arrows. Like roots. Shape. After the event, I stayed in the courtyard. People left slowly. Like they didn't want to disturb the air. Some came to hug me. Some just nodded. A few simply placed a hand over their chest and walked away. Then a young woman approached. Early 20s. Freckles. Wrist wrapped in a scarf even though it was warm out. She looked like someone who had learned to whisper before she ever learned to scream. She stood silently for a moment. Then asked, "Do you ever stop being angry?" Shape. The question didn't sting. It struck. Because I remembered being her. Staring at women who seemed so whole. Wondering how they carried the weight without their backs breaking. I crouched a little, met her eyes. "No," I said softly. "But it changes." Her eyes filled. "How?" "It stops owning you," I said. "You stop waking up for it. Eventually, it wakes up for you. It gets quieter. Less sharp. More honest." She nodded. Bit her lip. "Do you still hate him?" That question's unexpected. Not painful. Just final. I didn't rush. Then I said, "No. I hate the version of me who waited for him to become someone he never wanted to be." Shape. She looked down. "I haven't left yet. I didn't try to fix her. I just placed my hand over hers and said, then take your time. But pack your power before your clothes." Shape. That night, I sat on the porch of the Anchor House. The building buzzed quietly with new life, women laughing softly. One playing music somewhere, the smell of pasta in the air. It didn't feel like a shelter. It felt like a beginning. Shape. Marcus came out with 2 mugs. Sat beside me. She asked if you're still angry, he guessed. I nodded. They always ask that. And are you? I thought for a long time. Then answered, I'm no longer angry at him. I'm angry for her. The girl I used to be. The one who thought love meant proving your worth in small, careful doses. He reached for my hand. She's watching you now, he said. She doesn't recognize me, I whispered. She doesn't have to, he replied. She just needs to know you made it. Shape the next day, I received a box. No card. No label. Inside, a copy of a book I once lent to Marin, years ago. The spine cracked. Dog-eared. Tucked between the pages was a sticky note. You were always meant to lead. I'm sorry I didn't follow when it mattered. I didn't write back. But I placed the book on the shelf in the Anchor House library, between a memoir on surviving and a manual on building codes. Because both were needed. And both had something to teach. Shape that evening, I updated the inscription in the Anchor House foyer. It used to read, she rebuilt what he tried to destroy. I changed it to, she built something no one ever imagined, not even her. Shape chapter 23 comes. Next, a deeply personal chapter where Adele revisits her old journals. The ones she kept during the worst years. What she finds isn't just pain, it's a map. A reminder of how far she's come. And the final step in reclaiming her narrative before passing it on to others. Would you like to continue with chapter 23? You said, yes, VoxScript said, beautiful. You're now entering the final few chapters of Adele Monroe's journey, and in chapter 23, we look inward. This is a quiet, meditative moment. Where Adele reads the words of the woman she once was, and finally, completely, lets her go. Shape 23 950 words. I found the journals in a sealed box at the back of my closet. I hadn't opened them in years. I almost didn't. But that morning, as the sun moved across the Anchor House floor and the world felt still enough to listen, I pulled the box out and carried it to the sunroom. I made tea. Turned my phone off. Sat cross-legged in silence. Then opened the first one. Shape the handwriting startled me. Not because it had changed, it hadn't, but because I could feel who I was in the way the letters pressed too hard against the page. Tight loops. Crowded margins. Words like, maybe it's my fault. He didn't mean it. If I was just a little easier to love, it wasn't a journal. It was evidence. Of shrinking. Of silence. Of survival that looked like self-blame. Shape the second journal was worse. Not in content, in clarity. This one didn't apologize. This one documented. He moved the funds today. I saw the receipt. He lied again. I told no one. Not yet. Maybe that's my power. Maybe silence is a trap. Maybe it's a weapon. Maybe it's both. Shape I read slowly. Page by page. As if each entry were a breadcrumb from the woman I used to be. Leading me back, only to remind me I'd already made it forward. Shape then I found it, an entry dated just 3 days before the gala. I am not a woman scorned. I am a woman strategizing. He doesn't know. But I do. And I will not scream. I will outthink. I will outlast. I closed the journal. Placed it on the table beside me. And whispered, you did it. Shape there were 6 journals total. One for every year of the unraveling. Each one heavier than the last, not in words, but in realization. They weren't just notes. They were a record. Of resilience. Of strategy. Of the long, quiet war women fight behind smiles. Shape later that evening, I took them to the Anchor House library. I sat with our legal advisor, Miriam. And said, these should be used. Not as cautionary tales. But as curriculum. She nodded. For the education program? Yes. And maybe, eventually. The memoir. Miriam raised her eyebrows. You're ready? I smiled. No. But I'm no longer afraid of the mirror. Shape. That night, Marcus found me at the drafting table. I was sketching something new, not a structure. A timeline. Not of what happened to me, but of what I built in response. He looked over my shoulder. You're turning your life into a map. I nodded. So no one else has to get lost the way I did. Shape. Then, in the quiet, I asked him something I hadn't asked anyone in years. Do you think she'd be proud of me? Who? He asked. The woman who wrote those pages. He wrapped his arm around me, kissed the top of my head. No, he said. She'd be in awe. Shape. In the morning, I placed one of the journals in a locked drawer in the Anchor House intake office. Labeled, for when you forget how smart you are. Read this. Then start again. Shape. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering with power. Shape. Chapter 24 comes next, the penultimate chapter, where Adele is honored publicly with a Lifetime Achievement Award. But as she gives her final public speech of the story, she does something unexpected. She hands the microphone to someone else. And it changes everything. Would you like to continue with chapter 24? You said, yes, Fox Script said, incredible, you've stayed with Adele Monroe through betrayal, revenge, rebirth, and now, legacy. In chapter 24, we approach the end. But instead of claiming the final spotlight, Adele does something no one expects, because real power isn't about being seen. It's about lifting. Shape. 24 950 words. The invitation arrived in a navy envelope. Gold lettering. Too formal to feel real. The Women in Equity Alliance cordially invites Adele Monroe to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award for Justice and Reform at our annual gala, this October. I stared at the card for a long time. Not because I didn't feel worthy, but because I finally did, and that scared me more than the years I didn't. Shape. The event was held at the Meridian Hotel, a place I once walked into feeling small. Now, I entered in silence and power. Marcus at my side. My team behind me. The founders of Anchor House seated in the front row. Even Alara came. My old professor, in a charcoal suit, eyes sharp and proud. Shape. The room held hundreds. High ceilings. Crystal lights. But it was the silence that struck me when they called my name. Not polite applause. Not duty. It was respect, deep and wide and waiting. Shape. I stepped up to the podium. My dress was simple. My voice clear. I'm not here to talk about survival, I began. Because survival is a beginning, not a finish line. I paused. You know my story. But what matters more is who came after it. The women who didn't just watch me rebuild, they picked up the tools and began building themselves. I looked to the crowd. Then I said the thing no one expected. So tonight, I'm not going to tell the rest of my story. Whispers. A few furrowed brows. Instead, I want to offer this moment to someone who is just beginning hers. I turned and motioned to the young woman from chapter 22, the one with the scarf wrapped around her wrist and the question in her voice that had echoed in my chest for days after. She froze. Then stood. Her name was Lena. And as she made her way to the stage, I stepped aside. Placed the award in her hands. And whispered. Your voice matters now. Use it. Shape. She stood, shaky at first. But her voice didn't falter. My name is Lena, she said. And I'm not here because I survived. I'm here because someone made space for me to begin. Shape. By the time she finished, the room was breathless. A standing ovation. Not just for her, but for what the moment represented. That justice isn't just something you win. It's something you pass on. Shape. After the gala, journalists asked me. Why did you give up your moment? I smiled. It wasn't mine to keep, I said. It was always meant to be shared. Shape. The next morning. I woke up to dozens of messages. Not about the award. Not even about the speech. About Lena. A new voice. A new beginning. A continuation. Shape Marcus made coffee. Humming off key as always. You gave away the mic, he said. I gave away the myth, I replied. He turned. What myth? That power is only real when it ends with you. Shape later that week. I added a plaque to the anchor house wall. Every woman who walks through these doors does not enter to be saved. She enters to begin. Shape Chapter 25. The final chapter comes next, a bittersweet, empowering conclusion. No dramatic twists. No climaxes. Just peace. A woman who began her story with betrayal ends it with choice. Clarity, and a voice that finally belongs to her alone. Would you like to continue with Chapter 25? You said, yes, VoxScript said, here we are, Chapter 25. The final chapter of my husband called me dead weight. The divorce settlement weighed heavy on him. This story began with betrayal. With humiliation. With silence mistaken for weakness. But now, we end not in vengeance, not even in triumph, but in something stronger, peace. Shape 25-1000 words. It was a Wednesday. Ordinary. Cool breeze. Coffee on the porch. Emails in my inbox. The sound of construction finishing at the far end of Anchor House. Nothing dramatic. And that's how I knew I had made it. Shape people ask me sometimes. When did it stop hurting? And I tell them the truth, it didn't stop. It softened. It folded itself into the corners of my life, until it became part of the foundation, not the roof. Shape the anniversary of my divorce came and went. I didn't light a candle. Didn't post anything. Didn't toast. I simply woke up in my home. Wrote for a while. Sketched new designs for a women's co-housing project. And smiled when I caught my reflection. Not because of how I looked. But because I recognized myself again. Fully. Shape Marcus asked me once, months ago. Would you ever get married again? I smiled. I don't need a contract to keep what we already respect. He kissed my palm and said. That's the most romantic no I've ever heard. Shape some nights, I still wake from dreams where I'm back in that ballroom. The night Lucian said I was dead weight. But in the dream now, I don't freeze. I don't walk away. I don't even respond. I just laugh. Gently. Because I know something he never did, the weight I carried was never mine alone. I carried his ego. His fear. His fragile masculinity. His performance. His name. And the moment I set all of that down, I could finally stand tall. Shape Anchor House is full now. Not with trauma. Not with tragedy. With music. With stories. With light. We've opened 2 satellite branches. Lena now runs one of them. Elena trains new directors. We have a wait list, not because we're overwhelmed. But because we've become trusted. And that means everything. Shape sometimes women ask me what the secret is. How I did it. How I won. And I tell them, winning isn't a settlement. It's not a check. Not a headline. It's waking up one day. Realizing you're no longer waiting to be chosen, because you already chose yourself. Shape one morning, I got a message from a woman in Minnesota. She'd left her husband after reading a quote from my keynote. They called me dead weight. So I built something heavy enough to carry others. She said it helped her pack the car. Helped her leave the town she was afraid to outgrow. I cried when I read it. Not from pain. But from recognition. Because she had become the next link in a chain that could no longer be broken. Shape I don't speak as much these days. I write more. A memoir. Part manifesto. Part love letter to the woman I used to be. The one who stayed too long. But never stopped thinking. Watching. Planning. She wasn't weak. She was plotting her freedom. Shape. I still visit the site of that old ballroom sometimes. They tore it down. Built a conference center in its place. The marble floors are gone. But I can still feel the echo of my heels walking away from Lucian that night. I was never more powerful than I was in that moment of silence. Because I didn't react. I chose. And that choice started a chain of events that gave me back my life. Shape. Sometimes I wonder where he is now. But only briefly. Because my story didn't end with his name. It ended when I reclaimed my own. Shape. Marcus and I are planning to travel next spring. Paris. Then maybe Barcelona. Then maybe nowhere at all. Because that's the beauty of peace. It doesn't rush. It doesn't chase. It simply is. I keep one final quote pinned above my desk. The one that carried me from beginning to end. I was never dead weight. I was the anchor. And the moment I let go, he drifted.